Hello Carrera Go fans. I've realized that this is going to be my 10th episode of the Powering Your Carrera Go track. So I guess this is kind of an anniversary episode, which works out perfect for me to kind of do a summary here of where I'm at so far and what I kind of am picturing in the future with all this stuff. If you guys been following, any of you guys that have been following these series so far, you've seen where I've taken these Carrera Go power tracks and tried to do different things and modified them, and in the end I've been able to make this particular track that you see here. This is an older generation of track that has the vertical inputs on it and has 4 of them. With just one of these right here, I can basically do everything that I want to do so far. This has turned out to be the best unit for me, and like I say, I show instructions on how to make it work and all the things you need to do on my channel. But if you've watched the last few episodes of this series, I've talked about using the current generation of power track, which is more of a drive-by-wire system. It uses electronics inside the track, and your controller here, it's based, this isn't the same one, of course, this is for the older track, but your controller for this more current generation, it is not, the power isn't going through the handle like your old-fashioned slot car systems and like this system does. The power is actually going only through the power track, and your handle sends out just a little, I guess, a control signal, you could call it, for kind of a drive-by-wire thing that tells the power track how much power to apply to the lane. So that is much more difficult for me to modify. There may be some other people out there that can do it, but that's not me. So what I'm working on now is just the simplest stuff that I can work with, and this track right here has turned out to basically be the key. It has 2 separate power inputs, and of course your two controller inputs. And by using the 2 separate power inputs with a couple of really inexpensive power supplies from China or wherever you can get them, China, AliExpress, or whatever your favorite suppliers are, they have plenty of these cheap little Chinese power supplies on hand, and I've shown them in plenty of other videos previously, so you'll know what to get. Excuse me. But the bottom line is, if you have the dual power supplies and you do the little modifications I showed to this track, that has been my favorite so far. But on the previous videos where I was talking about using the earlier gen of track, there was some issues there. I've actually shown using 2 power tracks so you can separate power between the lanes, which is really, it's a slight advantage with that system, but it still doesn't get me to where I was at with this system. The problem with that newer generation of track, once again, because it is a drive-by-wire system, the circuitry inside the power track requires a certain amount of voltage before it's really going to turn on or off. And so when I set up these generic drone cars to run on that track, when I get them set for the lap speed, say to be competitive with a certain Carrera that I want to run against it, the voltage input on the car might be lower than the startup voltage for the car. In other words, so if I stop the race or try to start the race, just push the start button, make it go, then the car doesn't actually go. It needs to have a little push before it gets going, and that's kind of frustrating. I don't have that problem with this particular rig like here, as I said, with the modifications I've done and everything. This is still top dog in my book. Now I intend to do some more experimentation with the newer style power tracks, the drive-by-wire system, and like I said, I'm up to using 2 of them at once, and I guess I'm going to have to go ahead and try the max and min voltage, so I can show you guys exactly where that goes. So that's going to come up in a later video. But in the end, this is really the best route right here. Now, when I mentioned the modification to this particular track, of course, the main modification you need to do to these in order to run the generic cars, depending upon the size of your track. I think if your track gets really large, you may not have to do any modifications at all, because the voltage drop around the track is high enough that you're not heating anything up in here, or you're not heating up the little resistors that shut things off. But if your track is shorter, or maybe you're running a sufficient amount of jumper wires and stuff like that, which personally I've only got a few on my well, I have none on the track where I'm able to use the brand new or the newer style power system. I have no jumper wires on that track yet. No, wait a minute. Back up. Yes, I do. I've ran some jumper wires there, and I have jumper wires on the Southern track too. So that doesn't make any sense. But no, when you get to a certain point where I think there's enough track out there that the thermal overload or whatever that's in the little circuitry inside the newer model setups doesn't get shut off. But when the track is shorter, then you're going to have problems trying to run these generic cars. Now, the last modification that I have kind of hinted at a few times, which can be easily done to this earlier generation of track. Now, that probably is both the 3 and the 4 input style. And that brings me to another thing. With this 4 input style, this allows me to have separate voltages to each track. But since you've seen what I've been doing with the new setup, or should I say with the newer style power tracks, using 2 of them, I can change the voltage between the lanes by doing it that way. So you can do the same thing with your 3 input track. You could literally do this same generation of track right here. I think if you do all the same modifications I did to this 4 input, but if you have 2 of them, you can now split your power between the lanes without having to go through any other trouble. So for folks that have a couple of the 3 input tracks, but not the 4 input track, follow my other videos, look at what I did, and then just use 2 of the tracks and make sure only one controller is powering controller 1 and the other controller is powering 2, and you'll be able to do the same stuff I'm doing right here with this 4 input track. Well, sorry to get off on a different tangent for a moment there, but the thing I was about to say is that the next modification for this was to get rid of the turbo button, or in other words, in this case it sort of bypasses the turbo button. So we bypass the thermal overloads in the track, so it'll let me run any brand cars at any voltage however I need to run them. The other problem I have now, and everybody probably has, is with this turbo button, because when you apply the throttle on these, no matter which generation it is, you're only getting maybe 0 through 60% off the thumb depressor, and then the rest of it, once you're after half on here, it'll let you push the turbo button. But what happens is, so you've got actually some control over the first 60% of your power application, but then you hit the turbo button and that automatically jumps you to 100%, and you've got no control over that 60 to 100%, which is really kind of frustrating for people that start getting into more serious racing. And it also is a little bit of screw around on some of the generic cars and cars that have different voltage applications, because they don't work quite as well. Depending upon how much throttle you need and how much turbo you need and all that, some of them only want to crawl around until you hit the turbo button. And so there was a modification for this older track that allows you to disconnect it, or should I say bypass the turbo button. Now this modification, basically it makes it so that you've got 0 through 100% throttle on your thumb. So your thumb depressor now gives you 0 to 100% throttle right here. Now it did not make it so that the turbo button is no longer active. Anytime you're past 50% on the throttle, just like it was before, when you hit the turbo button, you're going to go to 100% throttle. But now you've got no control over that last little bit of throttle. So you don't need that so much. You kind of stay off the turbo and just try to modulate this bit here. But the main drawback of this is that this throw, and the way it's on camera, it doesn't really look like it's that little throw, because I'm kind of staring at my camera lens, or staring at the camera's screen while I'm trying to do this for you. But what happens is, this amount of throw to go from 0 to 100%, it makes it very, very sensitive I mean, it is like every little bit you give it is a lot of power, and you give it a little more, and that's a lot more power, and you're like, whoa! It gets crazy. And I have one of my systems that ended up inadvertently that I made this modification to. I actually hadn't planned to make this modification yet, but one of the systems that I did, I think it may have even been the one I did on camera initially for how to, when I showed how to do this. When I had glob soldered it in order to connect the pieces that I broke off of it that I showed on camera when everything went to crap. Well, I think when I glob soldered it, I accidentally soldered across an extra connection that disconnected the turbo button on this one of the lanes. And so it gave me a chance, once again, sort of a happy accident, I guess. So it gave me a chance to start experimenting with how this works if you're trying to drive the car using, pretty much just this thumb depressor. And I'll tell you, it's very, very sensitive. It makes it, I would say, in some ways more difficult. But it makes it more versatile. Now you don't really have any issues with running it takes away even more of the issues with running other brands of cars, because just the thumb depressor is going to do everything you need it to do, and you can get around the track with just about anything any time. But like I said, it is more sensitive, and I've been practicing with running one like this myself now for a few months, and you guys may have seen I haven't put up any new drone races doing that, and I'll tell you when I do. But it becomes a little trickier, a little harder to drive for me right now, and I think it's going to take some practice. It may be because I've been driving for a year using this turbo button, and I just can't hardly get off of that thing, right? I mean, I'm so used to doing it that way. But, excuse me, I'm hoping that I'll get more used to it, and I can actually make a determination as to whether this is a good route to go, and maybe start this way. Because if you start this way, and this is the way you get used to it in the first place, then it's not going to be a problem to have to kind of unlearn the turbo button situation later. So there you go. I think that's about the end of this, my 10th anniversary, or 10th video anniversary of the Powering Your Carrera Go Track series. Hope you guys have gotten something out of the series, and maybe some folks might want to, that haven't seen any of the earlier ones, might want to look back at some of them as well, because a lot of this stuff is handy for folks that are trying to figure out how to do different things with their track. I'm able to run drone cars very competitively now, and against my Carrera cars, and make a really good race out of it, and I'm up to the point that I can run 4 cars per lane as drones. So I really haven't run into any problems with it yet. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed it.